The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is the April 2019 presentation of Special Topics in English Learner Programming monthly webinar. We will begin momentarily. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this month's broadcast of Special Topics in English Learner Programming. This is OSSE's monthly webinar series covering a variety of topics pertinent to those who support English learners in their schools. This month's webinar is titled Improving Skills in the Four Language Domains. We'll be focusing on writing. I'm your host, Anika Harris. I'm the Professional Development Specialist at OSSE, focusing on English language acquisition, and I'll be taking you through the last of the four-part series on improving skills in the four language domains. This month's webinar follows three previous webinars on listening, speaking, and reading. We'll be covering writing within the framework of WIDA's English Language Development Standards. And today, we'll address an understanding of the writing domain, challenges English learners face when writing, and considerations for designing writing activities for both language and content development. As with the other three broadcasts in listening, speaking, and reading, we're going to start this presentation off with a case study. We'll learn about a fictional character named Moise. Moise is a 15-year-old ninth grader at ABC Public Charter School. He was born in the U.S. and he speaks both Spanish and English at home. The school is in the middle of access testing, and Moise's test administrator has noticed that he's struggling on the writing assessment. While he can copy text with ease, he can describe what he wants to write in the narrative section, but he just draws on the lines instead of writing out his thoughts. And that's exactly what he does in class, too. Now, let's pretend you are asked to observe him in class. You know that Moise is 15 years old, and he attends ABC Public Charter School, where he's in the 9th grade. You know he was born in the U.S., and now you learn that he lives with his aunt and two teenage cousins. His father, a former migrant crab cleaner, is now in an Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention facility located in Snow Hill, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. And his mother was removed, which is the formal term for deported. His mother was removed to Costa Rica. Moise speaks both English and Spanish at home. So as you've been asked to observe, you notice during Moise's English class that he can verbally state responses to the writing prompts, and his responses, again they're verbal, are comprehensible, but beyond beginning a sentence, he doesn't really produce much writing. So now I'm going to throw this back to you. You can use the question box or the chat feature to respond to the following question. What are some educated guesses we can make about Moise's experience in Writer's Workshop? Pull from the text on this slide. Some important details are called out in bold text and in italicized text to help you come up with your answer. Again, the question is, what are some educated guesses we can make about Moise's experience in Writer's Workshop? We'll take a moment to let you think. You can write your response in the question or chat box, and I'll be monitoring. Okay, so some of you are coming from the social-emotional perspective that he might not be feeling so great about his family situation. His mom is no longer in the country, and his father is incarcerated. Thank you for your participation. That's another interesting perspective that we don't know if the aunt he lives with communicates in English, but we may be generalizing here, but perhaps she's also working and is not a language model for him. His two teenage cousins perhaps are not a language model for him. Maybe there's not a lot of printed material in the home to stimulate what good writing looks like. Those are all good educated guesses. We'll come back to Moise, but now let's look at the 4 language domains. If you participated in this 4-part series before, you know that the 4 domains of language are reading, writing, listening, and speaking. There is no one domain that's more important than the other, and becoming proficient in one domain leads to increased proficiency in the next. Here's a definition of the 4 language domains from WIDA. You may notice that in listening and reading, students are processing, understanding, interpreting, and evaluating. It's not necessarily a passive process. It is active because the brain is engaged. We just can't see it happening. In contrast with speaking and writing, where students are engaging in communication, we can see the products, we can hear the products. There's more evidence that students are exercising those domains. Whereas listening and reading, we don't necessarily see it. But as I mentioned before, all 4 are important. There's no one that's more important than the other. We call listening and speaking oral language, and it's the foundation for reading and writing, or literacy. School is usually the setting where literacy skills in the English language happen for English learners, or where they develop for English learners. So you can take that bit of information and apply it back to Moise. For the person who commented, perhaps there isn't a lot of written material to stimulate Moise at home. That could be correct, and school would be the place to support him in developing writing. Within oral language, we know that listening and reading are receptive. It's where you take in information through your ears and your eyes, and it goes to the brain. Whereas speaking and writing are expressive, and those are thoughts that go from the brain out into the air via sound waves or onto paper via your writing. If you're not familiar with WIDA's standards, they are standards of English language proficiency that we use here in the state. And you see on the screen there are 5. Standard 1 pertains to social and instructional language, and standards 2 through 3 relate to the content areas: language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. It's important that we are helping students develop not only social language, listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills so that they can interact with one another in social settings, but that we're also developing their English language proficiency in the content areas. WIDA has also provided a graphic to show how proficiency goes up, how it increases. I want to mention that in the GoToWebinar platform, There should be a handout available for you. It will also be made available at the end of this presentation. You'll receive a survey via email, and there will be an attachment that includes some of these WIDA graphics for you. If you look at this screen, here you see that a student at level 1 or entering has limited communication, has skills but may not know how to use those skills in the English language. So they're not yet able to transfer their skills from their home language to the English language, but they have that potential. As we go up, we see that those skills in the English language increase, and they go from understanding and speaking and writing words to phrases to sentences, and then to paragraphs and extended discourse. In the state of DC, a level 5 or bridging is considered proficient, and when students receive a score of 5 or higher on WIDA's annual English language proficiency assessment, known as Access for ELLs, they are then qualified to exit from the English Learner Program. At a level 5 and definitely at a level 6, we're expecting that students are able to communicate on par with their native English-speaking peers. So, we know that here in DC we are in the midst of PARCC testing. Those of you who are involved with the test understand that it promotes college and career readiness. We're assessing the college and career readiness of students, and to be college and career ready, we expect students to be able to write and to read prompts and then respond by writing. Let's look at other reasons writing is important. And to explain the importance of writing, I thought I'd share how writing develops. So I'm adapting from some other works here by using the terminology phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and we'll see there are other phases of writing. These 3 phases on this screen are phases seen in early childhood, regardless of the first language the child speaks. Phase 1 is known as scribbling, and you see an example. It's an attempt. Children don't yet have fine motor control to produce syllabary or letters or calligraphy and other types of writing. But in phase 2, they are increasing their fine motor coordination and produce letter-like forms. In phase 3, they are producing letters, but may not yet understand that there are mechanics such as the separation between words, if that is present in the home language, punctuation, capitalization, if that's present in the home language. It's a string. Phases 4 through 8 continue the development of writing, where in phase 4, students in the English language are recognizing that words have a fixed beginning sound, and they write that as part of their product. In phase 5, they become aware of spacing between words and the fact that words have lowercase and uppercase letters. In phase 6, what we see typically in kindergarten is invented spelling with sight words. And this tends to go on through around grade 1 in the United States grade system. Phase 7 is transitional writing, and you see it becomes more clear with all of the conventions and rules of writing present, but some errors are still there. And by phase 8, students have mastered the conventions of writing and are also improving their expertise in spelling. Now back to the importance of writing. Writing for all, whether they're English learners or not, reflects what we have heard and what we've read. It's a way that we transmit ideas, and speaking is the other way we transmit ideas. Writing, it's what I'm going to say is not mentioned on the slide here, but writing is a form of transmitting your ideas where you can pause, go back, erase, edit, think again. What do I want to put on the paper? Try, look at it, reflect, see if that looks right, edit again, and repeat and repeat and repeat. When we speak, we usually don't communicate that way. We don't have the same editing process. And so some students advance in speaking faster and some advance in writing faster. So students who are very concerned about appearance or are maybe a little bit shy to show what they know and want to reveal what they know in a more perfect form may seem to develop in writing more slowly, or may be slower writers because they're thinking so critically about their own work and doing a lot of editing. Students who really just want to communicate and get their message known to the world may have more errors initially in writing, but also tend to excel in speaking before mastering writing. Those are some trends. They're not hard and fast rules. Writing also is how we can express needs and wants, fantasies, and we can express what we know or comprehension. Now, in order to improve in writing, it's an exercise that has to be done frequently. And the exercise requires exposure to printed models in order to improve. So like one of our listeners commented, maybe there's no print at home for our case study, Moise. To improve and feel confident when writing at school, that could be the case. Writing can also be leveraged to develop content knowledge. So be sure that if you're in content level classes with English learners, that it's not enough just to develop vocabulary or show some visuals, but also give writing activities for them to do so that they can become content writers. For English learners, writing represents what the student is thinking and can likely say in English. And here's a quote that you may have seen in previous broadcasts, just honing in on the point that all four of the writing domains, particularly reading and writing, need each other. James Britton, an esteemed educator, writes, "Reading and writing float on a sea of talk." If we understand how children learn a language, just as I've shown you the development, the typical development of writing in phases, by understanding that, we can better know when a child is developing language well or needs an evaluation for a disability. Understanding those phases can help us create activities that are developmentally appropriate to help them progress in language acquisition. And it helps us to develop assessments and to understand the results of those assessments and then plan for further language acquisition progress. Remember, receptive input, which is listening and reading, that alone will not make a language learner fluent. They really do need opportunities to practice output, which is speaking and writing. So sometimes there can be challenges for English learners to make progress in the writing domain. Taking a look at the prompt that students are responding to when they're writing, if the instructions are not clear or not easy to understand, that may be a barrier to producing writing. If the prompt really isn't engaging, doesn't speak to their interest or their world or their life, they may not be stimulated to respond in writing. And if students are not familiar with the content, then they may not know what to write. If the quantity assigned is too much, students may feel overwhelmed because writing is such a reflective process. If you're not that great at writing, and you start to produce some writing and then you look and see it's not going well, and then you're thinking in your mind, oh my, I have so much more that I'm expected to do, students may shut down. If there are no related supports or scaffolds to help them get through the writing assignments, students may not produce. And if the subject matter is one that's unfamiliar, just like familiarity with content, there may be some difficulty writing. With the environment, think of the student's emotional state. So if they're not producing that much, is it that they are unhappy or angry or otherwise mentally occupied with some other heightened emotion? Perhaps the environment they're in, the classroom, is not culturally responsive. So going back to engagement of the prompt, we're not just talking about the prompt, we're talking about does the student feel valued by the teacher? Is there evidence that the student is valued in the walls of the classroom and school? Do the students value that English learner? And physiological needs, just as with us as adults, if we're hungry, if we're not feeling well, we just may not feel like using our brain and exercising our writing muscles. Finally, there can be some issues with the writer himself or herself. Students may need explicit writing instructions where the instructions are repeated and or modeled so that the student knows what is expected of them. Writing is really tough. Just like reading, it can create mental fatigue when you're doing it in a language that's not your first language. That fatigue happens more profoundly than it does with listening and speaking. So writing really is a mental exercise. Students may benefit from brief breaks so that they can recharge their batteries. The writer might need writing tools. I can remember teaching high school. Some of my students had just arrived in the United States, or their parents really didn't have a lot of money. And so having a pencil or a pen or a notebook, they just didn't. So the need for writing tools, they may need support to have writing implements. Motivation. Are they distracted with other things that they have to do in their life? Do they feel that school and the class is worthy of their attention? And discourse level. So if a student is level 1, as we saw on the WIDA graphic, where they're really a beginner in their English language development, but they're being asked to produce a 5-paragraph essay and they just don't have those skills, they will naturally face a writing block. However, if that same student who is a level 1 and a beginner and is really just acquiring words and able to use words, is expected to use words and just words in their writing prompt, they're more likely to succeed. ELs develop better writing skills in writing when teachers are creating multiple opportunities for purposeful student talk. So in a lesson, if students are given the opportunity to talk through their responses before writing, talk to other peers, they may get ideas from their peers that they can use when writing. They can speak their truth and then write it. So on a previous slide I mentioned writing most likely indicates what a student understands. Speaking, if a student can speak it, as long as they have the physical ability to write, and we're assuming there are no disabilities, they're probably going to be able to write it. So creating opportunities for students to talk through their writing prompts first is like pre-work to being able to succeed on a writing task. It's a really good idea to allow students time to think and process between the languages they know, and then produce and revise. It again is very taxing mentally to write, and so extra time may be warranted. English learners benefit from models of a completed task or writing frames that they can then insert some of their ideas into, so that the expectation of what their product should look like is clear. Otherwise, a student can grapple in their head with what the teacher is expecting, and they get so overwhelmed, not really knowing what they're expected to do, that they shut down. Teachers can also support students by understanding the different levels of language proficiency and understanding, and when teachers understand the continuum from being a novice English speaker or English learner to a more proficient student who can communicate in English, they're able to plan activities and assessments that go from just recounting, which is saying what happened, maybe even verbatim, which is just fine at the beginning, to going up in difficulty to the level where they're explaining, and moving up in difficulty to the level where they're arguing. So knowing the student's proficiency level helps to plan more developmentally appropriate activities and assessments. And for you, I've created some sample writing activities at the different proficiency levels. When I develop writing activities, I think of what I know about my language learner, their home language, their proficiency in their home language, their proficiency in English, and their abilities in the different communication domains. For writing, I will also look at WIDA's writing rubric, and that is also a part of the handout. If you're not able to access the handout right now via GoToWebinar, that will be sent to you post-webinar, you'll be able to see the full WIDA writing rubric. For now, you can see a snippet of what's expected, or what students can do at levels 1, 3, and 5. You'll notice that they can do less at level 1, although they still should be able to produce single words, routine or high-frequency vocabulary. And when it comes to writing, it's okay and normal for them to copy text. A student at level 3, or the more intermediate level, should be able to produce sentences with some errors. The language may not be super complex, but if they're presented with a model text, they can adapt that and produce for you a product of their own. By the time the student is at a level 5, their product is expected to be more complex, greater in quantity, and they're able to use technical content-related language. If errors are present, the rate of errors and the types of errors should be on par with their native English-speaking peers. So for a level 1 student, we have an activity that's developmentally appropriate. It's called labeling, where the student is given a picture related to the content area, and on the page of the assignment, there are lines for the student to label the parts of the picture. And the student is provided a word bank, or even better, an illustrated word bank that they can use to label the picture. What you'll see on the next slide comes from science. And here you see the NGSS standard pulled for you. It's a high school science lesson on cells. The WIDA standard is the language of science, and here I would like the student to be able to identify the parts of the skeleton using a picture as a support and a word bank as a support. And here you see a picture of the human skeleton with lines or spaces. And off to the side, there's a word bank. It's not a complete word bank, but for the purposes of the webinar, you can see there's a word bank, and the student has to think about what they know and simply copy the text that belongs where it would go in relation to the human skeleton. So that's appropriate for a student at level 1. To challenge that student, a teacher could have the student write sentences using the exact same picture and the exact same word bank, but the teacher would provide sentence frames like you see below. One sentence frame says, "There are 11 blank." The second sentence frame says, "The blank, 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 and blank are in the leg." And the student would draw from the word bank and the picture as a support and what they know to fill in the blanks. Then once the student has completed the blanks and the sentences are complete, the student can rewrite the sentences in their entirety. And the benefit of rewriting the sentences is a student at this level will struggle with word order and the particles like the, are. Do I use the word in, or is it at? They get very confused about things that we take for granted. So the exercise of rewriting model text helps them to gain confidence and get into their memory what is correct word order, what is correct capitalization and punctuation, where the particles go, and they catalog that in their memory and then retrieve it when they're asked to produce writing the next time. The next activity you're going to see is appropriate for a student at level 3. So remember, a student at level 3 should be able to produce sentences not of a highly technical language nature, and there will be some errors. And again, the student would benefit from a model of what they're expected to do, and then they adapt that model to create their own product. So for level 3, I've come up with an interactive writing activity where the teacher will have students form groups of 3, and it's fine if the students are mixed English learners and native English speakers. Then the teacher would give each member of the group a different writing prompt related to the lesson. The groups get 1 minute to respond to the prompt in writing, and after 1 minute, the students pass their papers to the right, and they get 2 minutes to continue writing. Right, so they are continuing the writing of the student to the left. After 2 minutes have passed, students pass their papers to the right again, and they get 3 minutes to continue writing. So some of that time we expect them to look at what their classmate has written, and then they add on to it for the remaining time. When 3 minutes are up, the students pass their papers to the right again, and the original author should receive the paper he or she started. The students get time to read this expanded work, and then they get to rewrite the entire response on a separate sheet of paper. Again, just like with the level 1, these students would benefit from rewriting as a means of, beyond understanding how grammar works and word order and capitalization and punctuation, how to put sentence together in a cohesive way that makes sense. And recognize the students may have clarifying questions about what their mates wrote, and it's okay if they ask clarifying questions of their group mates to help them rewrite the entire response correctly. Let's look at how this plays out in a science lesson. The NGSS standard, again, relates to multicellular organisms, and we're looking at the language of science as the WIDA standard. The language objective is for students to be able to describe where an organ is housed in the human body, using pictures as a support, a word bank as a support, and writing frames. Prompt 1 for the students is, the blank is in the thoracic cavity. It is surrounded by blank. In a sentence, state what is connected to what on the top. In a sentence, state what it is connected to on the top and the bottom. And in a sentence, state the organs to its left and right. Write in sentences to state 3 other things you know about this organ. So the demand is just developmentally right for a student at level 3. We go from having some closed sentences or some sentence frames at the beginning, and then some clues in the middle of the assignment, and at the end they're asked to work independently to state 3 things they know about the organ. Finally, let's look at a sample activity, an exemplar for students at level 5. Again, students at level 5 are more or less able to give you a writing product on par with their native English-speaking peers. It will have no errors to few errors, and it should demonstrate facility with technical language and content-related language, and it should be linguistically complex. There should be a good amount of quantity, and the sentences flow nicely from one to the next. So a developmentally appropriate level 5 activity, we're using multicellular organisms again, relating back to WIDA's standard, the language of science. And the language objective this time is for students to be able to describe the function of the skeleton using a picture as a support and a partner as a support. Now note, students at this level are less likely to need supports, but if the supports like a picture and a partner to talk through are necessary, then by all means provide the supports. The prompt here is to describe the function of the skeletal system as a whole. Then pick one of the sections of the skeletal system listed below in bold type and explain how it protects the organs within and or surrounding it. Use the osseous composition and shape to support your answer. So you see that if you just look at the prompt, the technical Language within the prompt and the complex nature of the sentences make it inappropriate for a level 1 student unless there's a lot of scaffolding done for that student. Remember, a level 1 student is more likely to understand individual common routine words and be able to produce words that are high frequency. So this prompt is not so appropriate unless they have a lot of scaffolds. But for a student at level 5, little to no scaffolding is needed. For that lesson, provide students with the writing prompt you just saw and give the student time to write an outline of their answer. Then let students pair up and exchange their outlines. Allow the students to first read their partner's outline, right, to see, maybe even get ideas about the nature and flow of writing in the English language and get ideas about content. And also to assist their partner, because at a level 5, they should be able to edit other people's work. Then let the students take turns stating what more they need to know to complete the assignment. The partners can share their expertise in the content area or resources. Finally, let the students work independently to turn their outline into a first draft. The students might end up incorporating feedback and use additional resources if needed. So if you see in the middle of the lesson, they've had a chance to talk with a partner, and that talk is a way of firming up their expertise, acknowledging what they don't yet know and what they need. This is a metacognitive activity. And they take what they've learned from their conversation with their partner and turn it into a draft. The students should have a chance to repeat steps 3 and 4, this time letting their partner critique their draft. And it's really wonderful at this level for students to be able to give feedback in a constructive way because they have the skills at this point to do so. At the end of this activity, students would work independently to turn their draft into a final draft. So that's the writing process for you. All students can participate in the writing process, but a student at level 5 would have much more language to do so, both in the domain of speaking, right, in speaking with their partner, and writing. So going back to Moise, our case study, let's fast forward through the school year, and let's say it's June, and the English language arts teacher of our 9th grader, Moise, believe he's made rapid growth in writing English due to their understanding of how to support him with writing activities. So now he's writing narratives with short sentences, and he doesn't get stuck finishing the first sentence like he did earlier in the year. What are some possible reasons to explain Moise's progress in writing? Think about what's been covered here in this webinar, and then use the question or the chat feature to answer the 2 questions. What are some possible reasons to explain Moise's progress in writing? What activities could teachers recommend to his aunt to maintain his progress in writing over the summer? I'll give you a moment to think and write, and then we'll share. Okay, so the teachers may have given him some scaffolds or may have provided him with models that he could follow so he knew what the expectations were. That's great. What about activities to recommend to his aunt so that he can keep up this progress over the summer? I like that. Journaling. Give him a journal and maybe also provide the journal and the writing utensils if needed. And let him free write. I think that's awesome. Maybe some topics could be interspersed. So he could free write and then maybe once in a while respond to a prompt like, what was great about the summer? And yes, that's an interesting suggestion, to recommend to his aunt to let him go to the library and pick up some books to read so that he can see models of writing in English or even in Spanish. As long as he's exposed to text that he can comprehend to some degree, he will benefit from even reading in Spanish if he can read in Spanish. And that's because the skills required to read and write in Spanish transfer over to English. So he just has to transfer the skills. But as long as he's getting the stimulation, then he'll be able to transfer the skills. So that's a great idea. Thank you for participating in that case study. I wanted to call out some additional resources we have at OSSE, and the first is the recently re-released Delivering Education Services to English Learners. It's our Policies and Procedures document. We just released version 4 last week, and when you get a copy of this slide via email, you'll be able to click on the link and go right to the document. Within that document is OSSE's School Readiness Reflection Tool. It's found in Appendix E, and it outlines the components of a sound EL program. On OSSE's website, we now have a page dedicated to language acquisition, and the link for you is there on the screen. And if you'd like support in any way, you can contact me at anika.harris@dc.gov or our EL program manager, Jennifer Norton, at jennifer.norton@dc.gov. This webinar broadcast will repeat with a new theme. The next webinar will take place on Thursday, May 9th, the same time, 1 to 2 p.m. And note that this monthly series repeats the second Thursday of every month from 1 to 2 p.m. The registration link is the same. Next month's topic will be very timely for me. It will be on considerations for hiring English learner staff. Tomorrow, Friday, April 12th, we welcome Dr. Brenda Custodio, who will deliver a training on supporting newly arrived English learners, students with limited or interrupted formal education. As a note, if you're interested in attending, the training sold out very quickly. She was here December 2017 and got rave reviews. But if you would like more information about her work, the support services she offers, and her books, plural I should say, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to connect you to her. And towards the end of the month, we will bring WIDA to OSSE to present a 2-day workshop called Scaffolding Learning Through Language. This PD focuses on classroom practices that support ELs and multilingual students in gaining independence and expertise in grade-level content. There are just a few spots remaining for that training, which takes place on Tuesday and Wednesday, April 23rd to April 24th, here at OSSE. This is no longer a save the date, but I'm happy to state that Registration for our first ever Multilingual Learner Conference is now open. If you would like the link for that, just let me know. I'd be happy to provide that to you. That conference is free and it will take place Friday, June 7th, where we'll be having sessions pertaining to English language programs. And Saturday, June 8th, the day will be filled with sessions pertaining to dual language programs. Finally, there are some contacts for you. OSSE staff are here for you. We have Michael Craig, who's our assessment specialist. So if you have questions about the access for ELLs, screeners, and accommodations, please reach out to him. Chandy Wagner assists us with data, uncovering data errors, resolving them, and also data usage. I'm Anika Harris, providing professional development, and our program manager is Dr. Jennifer Norton. Hope you enjoyed this broadcast. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, and I look forward to being with you next month.